what I'm going to walk through today, guys, is I'll walk through Docomotion both from a Salesforce user perspective and from an end user, like a customer perspective, and also we'll take a look at the designer. Okay, so we're actually from a designer, how you actually create the documents and whatever. Feel free to ask questions as we go through. If you want to point me sort of like in the right direction, if there are any sort of specifics that you want to take a look at, then feel free to do that. So I'll get started and I'll do my best to stop, in between certain points so that you can also ask questions. So here I am in Salesforce. I'm looking at an opportunity, example of an opportunity in our demo environment. Docomotion, of course, can work on any standard object in Salesforce. It can also work on custom objects. So it doesn't have to be just the opportunity, but I'm just using that for the basis of the demo. So just briefly go over the opportunity just to see some of the details that you're going to then see in the documents that we create. I've got the opportunity owner here as Thomas Rothstein. I've got the decision maker, David Alon, other informations and totals about the opportunity. And then I've got here product line items. So there are 3 products, and this is a company that, sells electrical appliances. So we can see here TVs, but sort of, use your imagination when it comes to real life examples that you guys have. With the product comes a Lightning Generate Document button out of the box, and that's the most simple way of generating a document, and it will give you all the different opportunities when it comes to formats and outputs, and that's what we'll do first. So clicking on Lightning Generate Document, what it does is it gives me the selection of forms or templates that have been designed. This list of templates can be managed, okay? So it can just show specific templates that you want to show according to filtering behind the the button or whatever it is that you're using to develop the documents. In this case, I want to select a basic quote document, and by default on this quote document there is already an output and format defined. But just for this example, I'll click and see basically the ability or the selection of options that we have. So by default, this is going to be generated as a PDF and downloaded to my local machine. But as you can see, there are multiple types of formats. You can have it in PDF, HTML, Word, and mail body. And when it comes to the channels, you can have it as mail as attachment. It can be saved to files, saved to documents, downloaded to the screen, and there are also other options that you have, external storage like Google Drive, etc., notes and attachments, and others. So for this case, I'll just choose PDF and download, and I'll click Generate. So what it's doing now is the document that we've designed and tagged to the fields in Salesforce is now basically has taken that information from Salesforce and has populated the document. Okay, so that was just a simple generation of a quote. We can see the end customer, we can see the opportunity owner, and we can see the product line items within the quote. Okay, so that was a simple example of generating a document. Typically what we see, and this is a cool feature that we have in Docomotion, is that just prior to generating the document, you may want to make some last minute changes, right, to the document before it actually goes out. So you have your templates that cover all of the sort of standard stuff that you need, but you might want to change something. So we have a feature that's called Live Editor. And what Live Editor does is that when you click on Live Editor, what happens now is that the document is opened in an HTML editor, and it gives you the ability to make last-minute changes to the document. And these last-minute changes are also saved as versions that are linked to the opportunity. So you can actually come back to that specific document and you can update it again as you go forward. So like in this case, I'd like to say, okay, dear David, hope this looks great for you. And I can add at the bottom, it's fine terms and conditions. And I say, okay, well, you've got 60 days. So I've made that update, and you can also, through the designer, you can actually block content in the document so that then you can make sure that areas of the document like pricing and stuff can't be fiddled with, and that it won't then be recorded back in Salesforce. So there's also that sort of handy feature to make sure that only the stuff that you really want to be able to adjust can be adjusted. I can then generate that document. What it's doing now is, again, preparing the document, and I will receive a copy. And then I can see that, okay, the text that I added has been added to the document, and I've changed the payment terms and conditions, but the underlying template with its baseline information has not changed. So that's like a handy use case for those last minute adjustments. Any questions before I jump to the next option? Right.
No, all understood.
Perfect. Okay, so the next example I want to show is our interactive capabilities. Okay, so the ability to send out a proposal, send out a quote for the end user to respond to sign it, to send it back basically to Salesforce, and also to receive a copy themselves. So again, I'll choose Lightning Generate Document. And in this case, I will select the document that's for interactive. And for be able to do interactive capabilities, you have to choose HTML and link as the format and channel, because basically a link to the document will be sent to the end user, to the customer, and through that link, they can then gain access to the document and input the data. I will select the recipient that will receive. So just for the demo example, I'll select that. And now I click generate. So now what happens? So there are two things now that happen. One is a signature record, which is the customer object of Docomotion, has been created. The signature record records all the interactivity with the end customer. So it can be the actual signature and the details around the signature. We are e-signature level 1 compliant. Okay, so we're not like DocuSign, we're not a digital signature tool, but we are compliant to level 1 signature, which is enough for basically the basic e-signature requirements, because we record all the necessary information around the signature. And also, so that's the signature object, and you also get the feedback. So we'll see this update will be the feedback, the fields that the person has inputted in the document. If I then go to my email, as the end customer now, I've now received a link to that document. This email is a email Salesforce template. Okay, so this is just sort of like the default out of the box template that you can receive, but of course you can build and style the templates as you wish that suit your business needs. So this is just our default one, and I will click on the document. Now what's happening behind the scenes is actually the information is being collected and the document generated on the fly. And now we've received the document for signature. Just a few things about this document. First of all, when we talk about branding and logos and stuff like that, this can be easily stored in Salesforce and then pulled to the document. So if you have a customer that's creating tens and hundreds of templates, which is some of the cases that we have, of course, they don't want something that's static within the document. They then have to, when the company changes its branding, they then need to go through all the documents and update them. So that can be pulled from Salesforce. That's just one example of how you can have low maintenance basically on your templates. You can, in the HTML option, you can embed pictures and videos. So if you want to have upsell capabilities also within the document as they are viewing the document, that's also something that can be done with Docomotion. So going through the document, I can see, and we'll talk a bit later about the data model and the designer, but you can see here that information has been pulled both from the opportunity, but also from the account, and also from the contact, and also from the product line items that are linked to the opportunity. And you can see here that calculations have been made and also subtotals. Here we have the interactive part. And so these were the fields as part of our interactive data model. These are the fields that have been added to the document. So for example, I can request that the mobile number be updated and sent back to Salesforce. I can make remarks and say, this looks good, and I agree to buy. Agree to the terms and conditions, upload an ID if necessary, have a number of clients that work like in the car industry, or prospects that work in the car industry, and they want to be able to upload maybe a driving license or an ID of some sort. We have that capability as well. Signing date and sign the document. That's the completion of the actual signature. Here below, we can see also another additional logic that's been introduced into the document, and it's around, again, upselling. Based on the fact that this deal is over 5K, then these options, these products were also offered within the proposal to the client, and the client is able to then select one of those if they want additional information going forward. Submit the document. Now again, two things are happening. One is that the end user now receives a locked copy of the document. Okay, so that was the document that we had with the details, information that was inputted, and the signature. Here you can see that logic behind the scenes through the person selecting ovens. Then you received a message say, okay, a team member from the ovens department will contact you shortly. And behind the scenes, what has happened is that information has been pushed back to Salesforce, so that will trigger an update to say, okay, you need to get back to this client about specifically about this request for ovens. That's the document. If we go back to the signature record, and I should, if I refresh this, my machine's a bit slow today, but we'll. Right. So having refreshed the signature record, you can now see that all the information around the interactivity of the document has been recorded. Okay, so we can see here that the signer was David Elon, the end user, the customer. We can see what IP address, the date, the fact it was actually signed, the browser, all of the information that from it comes to for compliance. And on here on the right, we can see the feedback that was received through the document. Okay, so I can see that air conditioning I didn't select, that was the date that I signed, the free text, the information that I inputted, and that I clicked on ovens. Right, so that's the document and that's the signature record. Any questions about interactivity, interactive capabilities?
No, it looks good to me, thanks.
Cool. Okay, so we touched on basic document generation. We went through the interactive, and we looked at the live editor. Of course, and before I jump into the designer and the actual data and the data model and the designer, of course, generating the document can be automated behind the scenes. Okay, so rather than clicking on the Lightning Generate button, you can just click on a button that's been pre-configured to say, okay, this specific document in this specific format and this specific channel, send it out. You can click on a button and you can update a field in Salesforce to say, okay, I want to update the stage of the opportunity. Through updating the stage of the opportunity, then the document go out. So you can have it very fine-tuned and not too much click-clucking about to send out the document. And you can also use screen flow as well. So, you could change again, the stage of the opportunity here, and behind the scenes, there could be a trigger that just pushes out the document in a predefined format. So that was about basic automation. Taking a look now at the data model and the form. So a form, again, is a custom object of Docomotion. When you create the form, and I say, okay, I'd create a new form, you'd click on new. I will enter a form that we've already defined and designed. A form has a wide variety, basically, of settings to basically make it more and more rich and more useful for your business. Okay, so beyond the basic settings around it having a default file name, default channel, default format, a default email recipient, and all that sort of thing, there are other options that you have on the form. Just to sort of like mention a few. So for example, you want on every form generation, you want an activity be created in Salesforce so that you actually record the generation of the document. So you can add that. You can add additional files that will be then linked to the document and embedded in the document. Okay, so like, for example, you just want to add an NDA to the end of a document. You can do that as well and push that standard NDA into a document that you send. So there's loads and loads of stuff that's related to the form settings. I won't go into everything, but that's the richness of the actual form. The next stage, having created the actual form object, is to define the data model. Okay, so if this was a new form, we would start from scratch by clicking on the data model, and then you have the ability in a sort of drag and drop environment to create the data model. Now, comparing us to some of our competitors, this is one of the things that we find is one of the real key advantages of Docomotion, the fact that we provide a simplified option for building the actual data that's going to be tagged in the document. Okay, so none of this is, you don't need to do any programming, you don't need to take snippets, API names of fields, you don't need to do all that sort of stuff. You build the data model, you build the hierarchy of the data that you need. And once you've built that data model, you can go into the designer and select from that data model. Okay, so in this case, I'm residing at the moment on the main object. You need to select a main object for a form where it's going to be generated from. And I can see that I can select fields, lookups, related lists, everything. The depth that we can go to is 5 levels down. Okay, and we found that pretty much that covers, sort of like every use case that our clients need. And it's simple. We can just, for example, I select the close date, move that across, that becomes part of the opportunity. If I want to select description, I can do the same. Everything is now being pushed in the data model. And if I want to go down a level, I can, for example, look at the related list and I say, okay, I want to go down to the actual, as we saw in the sample, I want to go down to the opportunities, the product line items. Again, I can go down to the product line items, select from fields there and say, okay, I'll take the line description or product code. So that will be pushed under the, there we are, the product code under the opportunity products, and so on and so forth. An additional part of the data model is the interactive, what we call the interactive collection. And that is the feedback. Those are the fields and the feedback fields that you have in the interactive documents. Okay, so you do the same there. You can build out the interactive piece of the data model and save it to the form. Having now chosen and created the data model, I would now click save. In this case, I'll just cancel because I don't want to mess up the demo environment. And the next stage now would be actually to open the designer and to start to design the document. So you'd click on Open Designer. The designer would be opened, and let's just walk through what we can see in the designer. First of all, the designer is the only piece of Docomotion that's a local installation. Okay, so it requires that it be downloaded as part of the install of Docomotion and the configuration and setup. The designer piece will be downloaded to the local workstation, meaning that you need to have Office 64-bit installed on the local workstation, and it needs to be a PC. We currently don't support Mac. So that's when it comes to the sort of limitation, or let's say the specifications around the tool. Walking through the tool, the main area, of course, looks just like Word. Okay, so you have embedded Word within the designer, and you have all of the flexibility and the capabilities of Word for you to basically build a document. On the left-hand side, this is the cool bit about the data. Okay, so the left-hand panel at the bottom is the data model that we just saw in Salesforce. Okay, so you can see all of the fields under the account, and you can see the hierarchy. You can see the tree of how they're part of the data model, and from here basically you can select fields and tag them in the document. The top left is basically what has already been selected. Okay, so if I click on something that's already been selected, it will take me to the position in the document where that field was tagged. Okay, so going back to what I said earlier, we very much focus on this ease of use capabilities, and that will be simple to build the document. In addition to the data model, you can see here tools that can be used to enhance basically the capabilities of the document. Okay, so you can have container objects that you can apply logic to, script tags, and other sort of stuff. So let me just show you how simple it is to add a field. So if I want to now add, I don't know, first name, I will then just select first name, double click the first name, and boom, it's in the document. Select another field, email, and again, same thing, double click email, and I've made a simple tag of the field in the document. Going to more complex capabilities, you can see here, for example, the line items. Okay, so like the products that were part of the quote. Okay, now of course you want this piece to be dynamic. Okay, so you don't want to be, if you've got 1 product or 10 products or 50 products, you want the document basically to expand and hold those products as part of the quote. And so that's done through simple table capabilities. Okay, so I'll just show how you can do this. You just need to insert a word table. So for example, we'll take 3 columns, and it's enough to basically select 1 row for the headers, okay, of the columns, an additional row for the actual fields, the actual values. Once you've done that, Docomotion knows how to expand the table according to the number of values, the number of lines that you have in the related list. Now, the way you can see that when you select a related list is you can see that it points at as a table. Okay, so the T represents a table, and you know that that is a related list to the main object. Okay, so for this case, I would say, okay, let's take a look at some of the options. So I've got the product name, and I've got the product description, and I've got the product price, and then I just write in the concept name, description, and pricing. And there you have a simple table. Okay, so if I was to then save this document and use it for generation, then it would expand just in the same way as we can see in the styled table here, and you can apply calculations and stuff as well. I'm not a designer expert. We have our PS team that does that, but you can then apply those. So that was that. I think then the last thing is I just want to show our logic capabilities, and just a simple example. So for example, in this case, I have terms and conditions. Maybe there's a specific clause in terms and conditions that you want to hide, or you want to change it. I don't know, it's from English to another language or whatever. I can do that by selecting that that specific piece of text, I can go to a container and say, okay, I want to surround that with a container. I can go into the container object, and here I can basically apply my logic. So I can say, just for a simple example, I can say, okay, let's hide the container by default, but then based on a condition, so like an if condition, I will say, okay, number of selections here, but in this case, I will select a data tag and I'll say, well, specifically on this field, let's say, built a country, and if the country was the UK, then I would say show the container, for example. And that's a simple example of logic. You have multiple functions in there and stuff that you can use, but that's a very simple option. And what will happen now is, specifically if I was to generate this document, it would go back to Salesforce, look basically at the value of the built country. If it was the UK, then it would show that specific area of the terms and conditions. So that was sort of like, well, I wouldn't say in a nutshell, but that's sort of like main of the things from Docomotion.